within next keep can hear. Okay, thank you. Okay, once again, welcome to this webinar on amplifying the voices of women in peace building processes in Northwest Nigeria. Over the course of the year, Global Rights has been working in the Northwest specifically on situating, strengthening civic participation and spotlighting women in security and peace building processes in the Northwest. So in addition to a lot of the physical interventions that we have been implementing in Northwest, specifically Sokoto and Kaduna states over the last couple of months, we have also had a couple of virtual conversations to create widespread knowledge and to pass information across over a wider platform. So in the course of the work that we have done, some of what we've discovered is that it's not that women are not included at all in peace building processes. It is that a lot of times their roles are either reduced, not significant enough, not prominent, or not as prominent as that of their male counterparts. So what we have is women do have roles that they play, which are a lot of times key roles, but we don't get to hear about them. We don't get to specifically highlight, some of the achievements that these women have made in this regard. So what we are doing with this webinar in collaboration with the Kuka Center is to basically amplify the voices of these women. Previously, last month, we had a Twitter space conversation where we talked about, some of the ways in which we can include women in security and peace building processes, some of the ways in which women's roles can be more talked about, and how we can mainstream these conversations, and some of the roles that women are already playing, in this regard. So what this conversation is supposed to do is basically amplify the latter parts of that conversation. So some of the things that we have discovered in the roles that women have played is now this conversation seeks to, highlight and spotlight these roles, and also elucidate on how we can carry other women along and how we can expand networks for women to also strengthen and solidify their positions and their work and their efforts in peace building processes. A lot of women in the grassroots and in have, even without organizations, we have women who have grassroots institutions and movements to sort of, intervene in terms of peace building efforts and security processes. So basically, we want to amplify those voices, talk about the roles women are already playing in this arena, speak on how the women who are already playing these roles, how they could hold the hands of other women and bring them along, and how we can also make this a more mainstream conversation. So for better inclusivity, we don't only have women on this panel, we also have men, because this is not a struggle that is only for one gender. This is a struggle for both. I hand over to our moderator, Deborah Yusuf, who is a development communication strategist and has also done work in peace building in Kaduna State. The executive director of Global Rights is here, Ms. Abiodun Bayewu, who will quickly just have a brief introduction to this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Noya, and an awesome work you're doing right now. I just want to welcome everyone to today's meeting. Today's meeting is extremely important. I'm in the middle of another meeting, but then I found it very, very important for me to just tune off and just join this meeting. And why? In the past 15 years, Nigeria has gone through such a trajectory, and our threshold for violence has risen exponentially. And you would say that while we were so focused on the Northeast about 10 years ago, that we put all our resources, all our conversations, and everything we were doing into the Northeast. Little did we think about the impact and what was going on in the Northwest. The Northwest has also been inflamed for about 15 years, but then that we have not paid attention to it as much as we should till now. Not only have we not paid attention to it as much as we should till now, we've also ignored very, very important stakeholders in the Northwest, as we had in the Northeast. And when we talk about citizens, we often talk about how the Nigerian constitution seems to favor its men more than its women. But then, in the very way in which we interact with one another as citizens, as civil society actors, as security agents, it speaks to the way in which we have ignored the contribution of women and their voices, because they do have voices and they've always spoken. People say that women have been silent, but that's not true. The question is, are we listening? And how well are we listening? The Northwest has taken over the Northeast in terms of violence, and our mass atrocities report will continue to show this time and again. And today I'm so pleased to welcome you to this conversation and to welcome our panelists, to welcome Ajia Hawa Gambo, whose work is phenomenal and who's a well-known person. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Cornelius Shija, who also has done phenomenal work, Mr. Clemens Kulia. We will be joined later, of course, by our fourth panelist, Ajia Ramatu Adamu. But I also would like to welcome our moderator, Deborah Yusuf, who's also very, very vested on issues of security and human rights in Nigeria. Big question is, why do we continue to hold these conversations, conversation after conversation? But I've seen that conversations change things. Ask us, working on issues of the national around ensuring a national action plan for business and human rights seemed impossible when we started 10 years ago, actually. But in that period of time, in 9 years, we were able to push, advocate, have conversations. So there was a executive assent to the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Will that change things? Well, let's continue to have conversations till things actually begin to change in the business sector. How about in security? I would say that the conversations that we've started to have about security have impacted the Northeast. And if you remember how the conversations on the Northeast started and how there has been transformation in the Northeast, that we're hoping that we'll be able to do this in the Northwest as well. Words change things. Words will either destroy or words will build. Hopefully, our words at this meeting today, at this convening, will build. And everything you hear and everything you say will go towards ensuring that women's voices are heard in the Northwest. Let me welcome you once again and thank you again for attending this webinar. God bless you and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I'm handing over to Ms. Deborah Yusuf. Deborah, you're muted. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that beautiful welcome address, Mrs. Abiodun, the Executive Director of Global Rights. And I would just want us to take an introduction of the panelists we have that will be, contributing to this conversation on amplifying women's voices in peace building in Northwest Nigeria. We have Hajia Hawa Gambo. She is a 2023 House of Reps candidate, Kaduna, particularly Kajuru and Shikun constituency. And she's also an interreligious and cultural conflict resolution expert. You can use the emojis in the chat room to just give her a round of applause. And then we have one of our panelists, Clement Kuliak, who is the Northwest Regional Coordinator, Institute of Crisis Resolution, Peace Building and Conciliation. You can just give him a warm welcome with a clap by using the emojis in the chat room. And then we also are joined by Mr. Cornelius Shija, peace building and humanitarian expert. I really do hope that I am pronouncing this name to the best of my abilities. And we will later be joined by Hajar Ramatsu in the course of the conversation. And so one of the things I just want us to quickly dive into the conversation, because this is not supposed to last more than an hour. And I would also want to plead with my panelists to, as precisely, make their points within 3 to 4 minutes at most. It can be less, so that we can, give room for questions and answers and feedbacks and have a more, rounded conversation. So when we talk about peace building, I think one of the major rhetoric in the peace building sector is, because women form the brunt, they usually suffer as a result of the insecurity issues, and that's the argument that is being made for their inclusion. But I dare even say that for the sake of it, women are part of the society, so why not? Whether we suffer the brunt of the insecurity issues for the sake of the fact that we exist in the same society, in the same country, why shouldn't we be included? And I would just, this conversation is going to go, we're going to talk about, exploring women's impacts in peace building in Northwest Nigeria. We're going to talk about women's role in peace building, and then we're going to talk about empowerment and visibility as catalysts for positive change. So these are the several dimensions where we'll be looking at this conversation from. And I will want for as many as are joining us, you can share the links to various groups that you believe that this conversation is going to, be helpful, and also, take notes, put your questions down, so that when we get to that session, it will be as quick as possible. We'll look forward to a very fruitful conversations. Thank you so much for joining us. Now let's jump right in. Now, when we talk about exploring women's impacts in peace building, particularly in the Northwest region of the country, I'm throwing these questions. I'm going to do what we do most, ladies first. I'm throwing this question to Hajia Hawa Gambo. What are some of the impacts that women bring to the forefront of peace building efforts in Northwest Nigeria? What are some of those impacts that are not just, behind, but they are being brought to the forefront in terms of women's efforts in peace building in Northwest Nigeria? Ma, you're muted. Can you unmute okay, perfect.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. Good afternoon. Thank you, Nelia. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I am glad to be able to lend my voice to this very important conversation, because just as your COO said earlier, the Northwest has been kind of relegated to the background for a long time due to the insecurity in the Northeast. I think it is perhaps the fact that the Northwest houses is an intellectual hub. It houses some of the most prominent tertiary institutions in the country and West Africa as a whole. And it also home to some of the country's most prominent leaders and intellectuals. That is perhaps, I think, one of the reasons why the Northwest has been relegated to the background and not been prioritized in matters of conversations like this. But I am very glad that we are having this conversation because it is better late than never. And as someone who has worked in peace building and conflict resolution in Kaduna State, I know that there is not enough women in that space. And that is basically because of the years of exclusion and discrimination on all levels that women have faced. And we have to also understand that the fact that peace building and conflict resolution, especially interreligious conflict resolution, is one of the most sensitive areas to venture into. Not even many men work in that space, much less women. And the contributions, impact, and work of women continue to be underrated and underestimated in all fields. We should not forget the fact that we women are the mothers, we are the sisters, we are the brothers. A lot of conflict, we know that. Let's go back to our home front. A lot of conflicts will not have been resolved if not for the intervention of women, our mothers, our sisters, and our aunts. So we have skills, negotiation skills, we have communication skills, which is what is required in conflict resolution anyway. We have dialogue skills that a lot of men can comprehend. So if we can manage to settle conflicts at the community level at our home front, then I think it is about time that the entire leadership of this country begin to look at seriously including women in conflict resolution and crime management. Because when you look at all the organs of security apparatus all over the country, there are no women prominent. And that is not because there are no women in this establishment. There are a lot of women in the army. There are a lot of women in the Navy. There are a lot of women in the police, but they are never at the helm. That is part of the exclusion and discrimination, and the fact that women's contributions continue to be underrated, continue to be overlooked, continue to be underestimated. When you go to Kaduna State, where I am from, which has the Interfaith Mediation Center, which is, if I can say so, the most prominent and impactful conflict resolution association we have in Kaduna State. There are more men than women. And even the women in that organization, if Ramato Adamu were here, I'm sure she will attest to that, do not get as much support with it from the outside community to enable them amplify their impact and their voices as the men do. There are places a woman will go, and especially when she begins to talk about conflict resolution, people will just leave. So it is a long haul. This is a long conversation, but it is something that I'm glad we are beginning to have. Because as I always say, I believe that when the woman heals, everybody heals in the society. And when we begin to give women the desired and needed space to function at their optimum, we'll begin to see rapid change, not just change, but rapid change in all spheres. One thing I want to bring to the fore in this conversation is the fact that I don't think we have even scratched the surface in women's economic empowerment. I have been in the career space for 20 years, but I can tell you I'm still a very poor woman. Because there are places I go to and I know that all they need is material and financial support. Meanwhile, I am not in a position to offer that. And I know that, and they tell me that if this thing is provided, it will change not just the current situation, but it will prevent further occurrences of some things. And I know that. I come from a very poor background. I always say that because I don't think there is anything like middle class in Nigeria anymore. It's just the rich and the poor. So, and you all know that women are at the rung of the ladder. So long as we continue to sleep on this matter of women's economic empowerment, I don't think we're going to go very far. Do you know why? Because right now, there are women that are the heads of their homes. There are women that are the caretakers of their families. I was one, I am still one, and I know a lot of them in the same situation. So if a mother can provide for her children, they will listen to her, they will respect her, just like the man. Except for the fact that, of course, we women were more emotionally and mentally available than the men are. So if a mother cannot financially support her children to have a dignified life, pay school fees, go to school, have equal opportunity, that mother will not be able to function in her optimum as a mother.
Yes,
and then if she is unable to do that, then the children, when they grow up, they will look elsewhere for motivation and inspiration. And that's where the danger lies. And that is what we are seeing continuously. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You really highlighted some very salient points, particularly referencing how when women are involved in peace building processes, how we see better results. And there's data for that. An analysis was done on 40 peace processes in 35 countries over 3 decades. And it was found that agreements that had women involved in the processes and where women groups were involved intricately, they found out that those agreements last longer. These are statistics. They are out there. There are records to prove that women's contribution in this sector particularly, and if we want to even begin to talk about other sectors, we still have, as we call it these days, receipts to prove that, yes, indeed, women are doing excellent work in that regard. But I just want to, take the conversation further and perhaps talk about how we can shed light on informal networks and community-based initiatives women in the Northwest often lead for conflict resolution. But before I go to that question, I want to also throw the same question I earlier threw to Hajia Hawa Gambo on some of the impacts that women bring to the forefront of peace building in Northwest Nigeria, that some of, we have a lot of he for she's in our presence this afternoon. And I want to throw this question particularly to Mr. Clement Kuliak. Mr. Clement, I don't know if you got that question, but I don't know if you have recognized what impacts women are making in peace building in Northwest Nigeria. Mr. Clement, are you here? Okay. Please go ahead, sir.
Deborah, okay, hi. He seems to be having some
network issues, right?
Yes, so maybe you could.
Yeah.
I'll try to reach him over the phone and check with that, because he seems to be having some network issues. But just move on, and then I'll try to. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Noya, for that. And so I'll throw that question to the other he for she we have in the house, Mr. Cornelius Shija. And sir, can you please just in very few words just summarize some of the impacts you have seen, women contribute in the peace building processes, particularly in Northwest Nigeria?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's actually a delight to be part of this conversation. It's a conversation which has, both women have spoken, Abiodun and Hawa have spoken. It's been over years now, and this is the burner. So the contribution for women have played, it's actually enormous. I think the women who spoke have said a lot about it. I'm a practical person. I've been in the field, not only at roundtables. I've also been on the field to see what women are doing. Women are doing fantastic well. I've worked both in the Northeast for humanitarian responses, to the Northwest presently. We're trying to work on violent extremism. I tell you for free that the engagement with women is actually outstanding. Women actually try to push forward. You just give them a little and you will be amazed on what a little can actually, what they can actually do with just a little. It's fantastic work. It's great. We need to push more. We need to give them more. They need, like Haja Hawa said, empowerment. Empowerment needs to be on the front burner. I know we have a lot of policies that were put on the table, but policies need to follow with actions. Nigeria has a lot of policies that it has actually worked on and it has actually developed. But if we don't follow it with actions, it's just going to be something, a file under the carpet. Yeah, so action needs to be followed up, and very, very, very clear and timeline actions, so that we actually understand what it is we're trying to do. Luckily for us, we're in a new government, so engagement needs to be top right now. We're just seeing so many political actors being put in different positions. So right now, engagement needs to be done from civil society and other groups. Engagement needs to start from the beginning. 4 years is a long time, but 4 years is also a short time. Though if we don't start these engagements now, then we would actually have the same issues we've had for the past years. So I think engagement and empowerment, giving women the voice, especially at the community level. I tell you that I work in communities around Kaduna, around Kano, and I tell you that what we see is really, really fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Women are top.
I want to just interject here and just throw my question, because I sense you're about to answer it, and I want to properly frame it for you before I move back to Hajia Hawa Gambo.
Okay.
And I would, because you were about to start talking about some of the community-based initiatives, and I want you to particularly, in speaking to that, shed light on the informal networks and those community-based initiatives that women have been able to lead in terms of conflict resolution, specific initiatives that you've seen women leading in terms of conflict resolutions across the Western region.
Okay, a practical example of community-based initiative is what we call the safe spaces for women. These spaces is where women actually come around and they discuss what it is. You find out that some of the issues, unfortunately, I'm not privy to be in the meeting, but I know things that come out of the meeting. You find out some issues where you have violence, where you have women being subjugated, their economy is being downplayed. When they sit down in these safe spaces, is where they see other women and they actually bring out these ideas and solutions. You find out that they actually try to bring out solutions for themselves. Now, solutions which are context-based, which you don't have to actually bring out solutions from other parts to bring into their own space. They bring out solutions in the communities, and they actually the project has gone on for over a year now, and I can tell you remarkably that these women now only need voices to actually be heard, so that they can actually engage. Right now, you have women saying, okay, we want to speak, we want an engagement with the local government authority. I'm like, wow, okay, let's see how we can actually push it that for you. So when you have those kind of engagement, starting from the local levels, going up to the states and maybe to the federal levels, then you find out that this will actually be good. So like I said earlier, this engagement needs to be done quickly and fast, so that we actually catch time to actually see what we can do going forward.
Thank you so much. While we wait for Mr. Clement Kuliyak's network to be stable, I will just move on to Hajia Hawa Gambo with the same question. Hajia, you're someone who has worked in this space for years. You've had a very long span career, from journalism to conflict resolution, now politics. What are some of the community-based initiatives that you've seen in the informal network that you've seen women lead in terms of conflict resolution in the Northwestern region?
Thank you for that question, Deborah. I haven't been in Kaduna actively in the past 4 years. I just went back to Kaduna last year to contest election. So I don't know what has been happening in that respect in Kaduna in the past 4 years, since about 2018, 2017. But before then, I know that the only viable space that women get together to support themselves is the safe space where they have to discuss issues bothering about everything in the community, between crime rate to insecurity to economic empowerment, and how they can basically support themselves, each other and their family. There are various women groups, they still exist, that they do daily, weekly, and monthly contributions, and they support each other. And it is within those groups that these conversations take place. Mind you, especially within in the deep root at the deep grassroots community level, women do not have spaces on the table of men. They have to create their own table. So on these tables, you find a whole lot of different functions. They discuss about anything that needs to be discussed, and they do contributions, and they support each other in every way. So such groups are still very much relevant, and they are still very much in existence. They are actually more now, because when I went to Kajuru and Chukun for my campaigns, it is these women groups that I continue to meet. And it is these women's groups that, if anything, I can say I have had a one-on-one talk and conversation with them. And you know, we women, mothers will always be mothers. Their needs has always been, they want peace to be restored to their community, and they want their children to be able to go to school. That is just it. And these are the things they discuss even within themselves at the community level, at their group level. They contribute money to pay for their children's school fees. They contribute money to pay for hospital bills amongst themselves, for their members. They contribute money for all sorts of things. That is why in my earlier summation, I said, I don't think we are scratching the surface on women's economic empowerment. Because you see these small women groups that I'm talking about, these are women groups that have a lot of women members, that have a lot of needs, but they are not, they don't have a voice, they are not amplified, and they don't have the capacity to form a viable structure that will enable them to be funded for anything. So they don't have any support anywhere. The only support they have is within themselves. And that is what they do week in, week out, day in, day out, and month in, month out. And they continue to grow. They even have stuff like Ashobi and stuff like that. So these are the things I have seen when I went to campaign. And there are things I have always known existed, just now that there are more groups coming up. And I really do feel that if we want to expand the conversations on conflict resolution, these are the groups of women that we need to contact, that we need to connect with. And when they are properly trained and they are properly supported, it will amaze you to know what they can do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I myself am also I'm a peace builder, and I'm also from Kaduna State, and I do most of my work in Northwest, so particularly Kaduna State for now. And some of the things I've seen mother groups, I've seen loan committees, I've seen women, neighborhood alliances, and these are women's efforts towards peace building. But like you have rightly pointed out, there is no empowerment. They don't have the kind of support to scale the work that they do, and that sort of limits them. And especially with now the new economic realities on ground, there are so many things to be done and so little resources on ground. So I for one can testify to that. So I just want us to move the conversation forward a bit, and I want to talk about we've spoken about informal networks, and which we've tried to shed light on community-based initiatives women have led in the Northwest region for conflict resolution. But I want to talk about formal structures and how can formal peace-building structures better collaborate with grassroots women's initiatives to create a more inclusive and comprehensive comprehensive approach? And I would like to, I don't know if Mr. Clement is back on the meeting, and if he is, I can see his hands raised. So I want to throw that question to you before we get back to other panelists. how, I don't know if you caught that, but I'll just repeat it again. How can formal peace building structures better collaborate with grassroots women's initiatives to create a more inclusive and comprehensive approach? We've spoken about the informal networks. Now we're talking about formal peace building structures. Mr. Clement, can you hear me? Mr. Clement, you can unmute yourself and speak. Okay. No, I think we're still having issues with Mr. Clement Kuliak's network. I really would love to hear his contributions, and I'm sure a lot of our participants that have joined this webinar are also hoping to hear that. So let's keep our prayers up as we hope for better network. But I will just move to Mr. Cornelius Shija, who is the humanitarian expert and peace building expert.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back again. So now we're discussing formal sectors. Formal sectors, when we try to look at them across either communities or the state, we know that there's a lot in collaboration that they should do. We've seen one of the top of the list is empowerment. Build structures, and see how they flow. When you have women-led structures and you have women full participation in formal sectors, you try to see how this can actually build and complement the work that's already been done. Other formal structures like governments, private individuals, private organizations. I think for the Northwest is one of the things that we don't see a lot, where there are private institutions coming on board to actually build on this very particular issue. Because most of them are for profit, and when people discuss for profit, then it's actually another discussion for another day. But we try to see how they can actually push in collaboration with either government institutions or other institutions who have the capacity to actually carry out these collaborations. You'll find out also that these collaborations will actually foster development. Development in the sense that women will actually try to actually build themselves, their images, and actually see that, yes, this is actually what we can actually try to do. But we should also see that women should be given the space for women to actually carry out this themselves. Like other speakers have said, women, they just need something to actually push up. And when they're pushed up, that's all they need. They actually float and they carry out amazing things. So collaborations need to be strengthened. I said the new government is in place. 4 years is a long time, but 4 years is also a short time. So collaborations need to start in earnest. Formal ways to actually push for these collaborations and these engagements should actually be on the top burner. As it is right now. I think that's my take on the formal structures. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead. I had a little network issue, but I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. I said collaborations between government and private institutions should be key, because that's where what we're lacking behind, especially in the Northwest, where you have private individuals not engaging more in this. Yes. So I think.
Thank you so much, Mr. Colonius, for that contribution and to this discussion. I don't know if Mr. Clement is back online. Mr. Clement, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you finally, sir. I don't know if you caught the question I threw earlier.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's perfect. That's perfect, Mr. Clement Kuliak. Welcome to the conversation. Sorry for the network.
Okay, I'm sure you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear, and I'm sure others can hear you if I can. So we started the conversation, and we've gotten to the point where we're discussing how formal peace building structures can better collaborate with grassroots women's initiative to create for a more inclusive and comprehensive approach. And we were asking for your contribution to this discourse. How do you think that can be done? Mr. Clement, are you there? I think we've lost him. Or maybe there's some delay. Okay. This is sad, but we'd have to move on while the network hopefully gets better. Now we've spoken about the informal networks. We've spoken about the formal, how we can have more women collaborate in the formal peace building structures. And I remember that in 2000, in the year 2000, that was when the UN introduced the Women, Peace and Security Initiative. And then Nigeria adopted that agenda. They had a national plan. And I saw earlier someone threw a statement in the chat box talking about that, and I had it jotted down here earlier, and I intended to ask, and I'm throwing this question back to Mr. Cornelius. If Mr. Clement is back and he can hear me, it would be very awesome to to hear him speak. But before we get him back on the webinar, I'll throw this question back to Mr. Cornelius, and then we'll move to Hajia Hawagambo. Mr. Cornelius, particularly in the Northwestern region, how has this implementation, this action plan be implemented? How is the implementation process going? Are we making progress in respect to the women, peace and security agenda?
Okay, thank you for that. In Kaduna State, I'm actually part of a small team, which we're trying to work on the signing of the implementation in Kaduna State. It started last year. Consultancies have gone round in Kaduna State, pocket of consultancies, and hopefully get it signed this year. Because like I said, the new government is in place and we need to hit the ground running. Absolutely. We need to get that signed. We need to get that signed, and we need to move on that. It has been, unfortunately, also it has been fallow for some time because of funding. Because you find out that these things only come up when an implementing partner or somebody once says, okay, I have a particular fund to actually put into this thing. But once fundings are not available, you find out that everybody just goes back to the shelf. So luckily for us, a few international organizations have actually come up to say, okay, we will try and fund this process. Right now, the new legislative is on sits. I think advocacy should be taken up with the new legislative to see how they can actually push for this. But it also be good if the executive can actually push for it, because we found out that executive bills actually move faster than other bills. Yeah, so if the executive, luckily for us also, we're working in one of the ministries, the Human Services in Kaduna State, so we'll try to see how we can actually push for that. The desk officer is seated in the ministry, so it's actually a good thing for the implementation. But like I said earlier, we should not only sit and watch just policies, policies and actions. So we should also move and see that while we're pushing for policies to actually be signed, policies are good, but while we're also pushing for policies to be signed, we should also actually look at the implementation, because we don't want to have a situation where people just sign documents and just throw it under the table. So we
And
actually
we have a
engage.
lot of that in this country already.
Yes, we have a lot. You can tell me that we have a lot of that in this country. So it's actually good if we can actually move for policies and action both assigned. So hopefully, if we don't get it signed this year in Kaduna State, we'll see how it goes next year. But not only in Kaduna State, but we should also look at the Northwest, because the Northwest boundary have similar cultures, they have similar religion. So it's actually good if you can actually get it in the Northwest region to actually see how they can better, because we have said here that the conflict in the Northwest is growing, the violence is growing, women are being marginalized, women don't have, with the economic situation right now going on in the country, women are being relegated to the background. The poverty level is alarming. So we actually need to actually push for that and see how I've seen the peace and the Women, Peace and Security Network framework. I've seen the document. It's fantastic. It's fantastic, and it's something that we should actually push for. Civil society is doing it right now. I know of Kaduna State, civil society is doing it right now. So we'll see how the other Northwest states can actually follow suit, and so that the whole region can actually have it signed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for those contributions. At least we know who to, look out for feedbacks in terms of Kaduna State and how the agenda is going.
I'll get feedback. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Cornelius. I think I have Mr. Clement in the chat box trying to respond to some of those questions via chat because of his poor network, and I'll just try to read his response. He says, to enhance peace building in Northwest Nigeria, formal structures must synergize with grassroots women's initiatives. This entails recognizing and valuing local women's expertise, integrating them into decision-making processes, and providing resources for capacity building, establishing channels for regular communication and collaboration, as well as offering training and funding that can ensure that grassroots efforts align with broader strategies. This inclusive approach harnesses diverse perspectives, amplifies community voices, and generates a more holistic and effective peace-building framework. This is Mr. Clement Kuliak's response to the initial questions that were thrown at him. I am still hoping that his network gets better in the course of this webinar, so we can at least hear his voice and takes, virtually before we come to the end of the session. Now, moving quickly, we do not have a lot of time on our hands, and I would like us to move as quickly as possible. And I'm pleading with my panelists to 2 minutes max, just be precise and hit the nail at the head so that we can finish in due time and take questions and answers. So I want us to, take this conversation to the empowerment and visibility as a catalyst for positive change. Earlier on, when Hajia Hawa Gambo was talking, she spoke particularly to how women are not being recognized and in terms of peace, particularly now in peace building efforts. We know that we can go on several sectors and institutions of how women's efforts are not being recognized or how they're not included, but we're talking particularly to peace building. So, and I would like to throw this question to you, Hajawa. What are some of the practical ways to engage key stakeholders, various and diverse stakeholders, in supporting women's peace building efforts, so that they can come and recognize women's peace building efforts beyond just doing the work and not getting the recognition? And we know that you can draw a straight line to how recognition can bring more resources and empowerment. And I do not just want, for lack of time, I can expand on that, but for to manage time better, I would just like to throw that question to Hajia. Practical ways and various I beg your pardon, I don't know what's going on. Practical ways to engage various stakeholders in recognizing and supporting women's peace building efforts.
Thank you very much, Deborah. And I would like to say that this webinar right here is one of the practical ways. because, you know, a problem once discussed, it's on its way to being solved. This fora like this, platforms like this, that discusses about these issues is one of the greatest platforms, because I know on the panel here, we have people who are in direct contact with the stakeholders and people who are directly involved in the peace building process at all levels. So they now will have more knowledge and awareness about how women's contributions are being underestimated and downplayed, and they can take it up. Now, sorry, I can't remember your name, the gentleman from Kaduna, who is involved in the peace building process. Please, yes, Mr. Colenius, please take this back to the people at the top, the stakeholders. You will find women at all levels, especially the grassroots level, who are passionate about peace building and will be willing to be a part of the peace building process. Please do not hesitate to bring them on board. And to the Global Women's Rights, thank you very much for creating this webinar, because this is a very important conversation. And I look forward to seeing it published online, both the video and the transcript of this conversation. This is the practical steps that we're talking about, because when it gets out there, that is when stakeholders will be more aware and funding will come in. Nothing can be done without funding. It took me a long time to realize that. A lot of the things we have been doing individually by ourselves that has not been recognized is partly due to the fact that we have been working from our own purse based on our own efforts with little or no funding. So funding is really integral, is really important, and it is conversations like this, fora like this, that will get the recognition out there for it to attract funding. And Mr. Colenius, please take this conversation to the people at the top. Women are ready. We love this country. We love our communities. We want to see Nigeria prosper. And unless we are brought to the table, nothing is going to change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everyone here has a role to play. Be you a participant, a panelist, you have a role to play, and you must play it if we want to amplify women's voices in peace building, because there's a lot of work to be done, and there are just so many of us, and you can use your resources, your platforms to amplify the work that women do in peace building and several other sectors. I would quickly, I don't know if Mr. Clements is available to respond, even if it's via the chat box, but I want to throw this one question to both gentlemen. And this question is on strategies. There's something about strategies. When you're strategic in your approach, we tend to have more results and impact. So are there some strategies that you think women peace builders can employ to enhance the visibility and ensure, still talking about rightful recognition, are there particular well-tailored strategies that have been employed in other areas that you think women need to borrow a leaf out of that book so that they can enhance their visibility? Mr. Cornelius, you can go first.
Okay. Thank you once again. And the straight answer is yes, there are. There are strategies. There are a lot of strategies. One on the top burner is documentation. We found out that documentation actually helps. Documentation actually assists the visibility. Most of what civil society and other organizations do these days is how they can actually carry out these documentations and see how they can actually push it out. Because like what Haja Hawa just said, that this webinar should actually go out. So when you don't have documentations, when you don't have this, it doesn't portray visibility. So that's one strategy that should be on the top burner. Everything from the grassroots level to the community level, it needs to be documented. It needs to be put down either visually or written, so that it can actually sell out more. So that when you're actually trying to actually gain more recognition, it's easier to actually show that this has been done, this can be done, and this will be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also for sustainability, because that's where most people try to actually focus on sustainability. Once you have visibility, you have documentation, you have visibility, you have sustainability. Once you have sustainability, you find out that work is cut out for you. It's easier for you. Everything just sells out for itself, so that anybody who is trying to actually put into resources into the system will actually say, okay, this has been done, and I can actually see for certain that this has been done. So I think documentation should be on the top burner. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Document women, document everything that we do, you do in your various fields, whether you're a peace builder or not. Documentation cannot be overemphasized, because when you document it, you yourself begin to see the growth process and how you are advancing, and it will be easier to sell the work that you do, and attract the visibility on when it eventually comes, and or as we pursue that recognition and visibility. Documentation is important in written form. I personally, I believe that documenting using different means, whether by writing, not just restricting oneself or one's organization, okay, to just pictures and videos, or just written documents, because we all know that not everybody wants to read a document, but we know that some people watch a video. Not everyone may have the patience of watching a video. Some may want to read a document, and some may just want to see picture highlights. So explore all these opportunities, and in the amplification of women's voices and peace building, particularly in the Northwestern region. And we're rounding up this conversation very soon, and I just have one more question for my end, and then we'll go into the Q&A session. And I'm hoping that this last question, we'll have the privilege to hear Mr. Clement Kuliak speak, and if not, that's just so unfortunate. So we'll take this last question, and I'm true, because it's still coming back, to the men folk. But before I go to the men folk, we're talking about women, right? So we must continue to register the voices of women. I'll go back to Hajia Gambo, and talking about we've talked about recognition a lot, and we're now going to talk about how we can ensure that the recognition and acknowledgement of women's peace building contributions translate into sustained support, measured and sustained support. Now, beyond, okay, once we get that recognition, once we do all that, employ those strategies, how can it translate to sustained support, that we know that on a consistent basis and level, we're having support to push some of these initiatives, to scale the work that we do as peace builders? Madam Hajia, I don't know if you caught that question.
I'm not sure. Please, can you take it again?
Okay, I'll take it again. How can we ensure that the recognition and acknowledgement of women's peace-building contributions translate into sustained support?
I'm not sure there's a question I can answer outrightly, Deborah, because the only way we can ensure sustained support is through funding in different ways: capacity building, direct financial funding to ensure continuous implementation of what the women are doing. So I am not a key civil society or international organization worker, so I absolutely don't know how that support can be sustained. But one thing I do know is that as a journalist myself, you cannot underestimate the power of visibility. In my own part as a journalist, the only way I know that support can be sustained is through constant visibility. So long as we have women working in these spaces, we must continue to make them visible in every platform, in every sphere, both print, online, broadcast, everywhere. We must flood media spaces with women's contributions, with women's work, with women's effort in peace building. That's what I know I can do. So
Yeah,
That's it.
thank you so much. That was beautiful and very precise. Talking about sustained support and how we can scale that work. You know, most times we feel like there's nothing we can do really, but that post, you don't know who is watching, who is
Yeah.
one of your 3,000 followers or friends on Facebook or on
Yeah.
social media. You may not have the money to contribute or fund an organization in their work, but just amplifying the work that they do through your social media is something, and it goes far. At least tomorrow, someone has heard about their work, they have heard about what they're doing, and it's, expanding their visibility. So, and I totally agree that funding is how we get sustained support. So it's not just enough to applaud women and have all the statistics and data, beautiful, but women's efforts in peace building needs to be funded for lasting impact. So I would just quickly thank you so much to our panelists for this beautiful and awesome and very insightful contributions. I will just direct the last question to Mr. Cornelius, and we'll open this for the Q&A session. We'll go into the questions and answers session. And the last question, Mr. Cornelius, and this is specifically because you're a man, so we want your male perspective. How can men be effectively engaged as allies and partners in promoting gender inclusive peace building efforts? How can we get more men like you to engage women peace builders as allies and promote gender inclusivity and peace building efforts? Mr. Cornelius, I don't know if you were there, and if Mr. Clement has something to say, he can put it in the chat box, or if his network is better, he can prepare to speak next. Very briefly, Mr. Cornelius, over to you.
Well, very briefly, it's what we're doing right now. We're contributing as men. It's a space.
More.
You want more? Okay. No, they're honestly, yeah, honestly, I'm in the field, and I can tell you that there are a lot of men. There are a lot of men. It's just that it's not amplified enough. So maybe I think one of what we should be focusing right now is on the amplification. But if it's in the space, they're honestly a lot. I work for a women's led organization, so I know what we are charged with doing within the organization, and I can tell you that a lot of men are actually in the space. I think, like I said, amplifying it should be our next target. So amplifying it is where we would actually try to see how we can actually engage. I can actually engage with other men to see how, okay, we're being saddled with the responsibility of telling the world what we're doing. I know recently this year, for the International Women's Day, a lot of us actually came out. A lot of us were actually on the streets. A lot of us were actually in different forums engaging with different stakeholders. And also, like I said, with the signing in Kaduna State for the Women, Peace and Security Network. So for a lot of men are actually in the space. So we'll see how we would amplify it, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cornelius has spoken as a true male representative. He said there are a lot of men, and I would agree with you, because earlier this morning I was on a radio program and we're talking about, the reintroduction of the gender bills in the National Assembly, and I particularly spoke as how we have lesser women in the 10th Assembly than we had in the 9th Assembly. And when it was time for the calls to start coming in, one caller called, and he was a man, and particularly from the northern region, and he was so passionate about the gender bills, and he had a lot of things to say, positive, and a lot of support to give. But I always am a firm believer that there is still more that can be done. There are still more fishes that can be caught, and so we will not stop until everyone gets on board and has a proper understanding about these issues and how they can be allies in promoting and amplifying women's voices. We've gotten Mr. Clement Kuliak's thoughts on the question, and I'll just read it, and then we'll open up the session for question and answers. So I have here by Clement Kuliak. Engaging men as allies in gender-inclusive peace building involves education, promotes awareness about gender dynamics and the benefits of women's involvement in peace processes. Then women are the first contact and educators of any man as mothers. We have the second, leadership by example highlights male champions who actively support and collaborate with women peace builders. And the third is dialogue platforms. Dialogue platforms create spaces for open conversations on gender roles, fostering mutual understanding. And number four is empowerment, encouragement to challenge harmful stereotypes and advocate for women's participation. And then five is shared responsibility, emphasize that gender equality benefits everyone and is integral to sustainable peace. And the sixth is joint initiatives, develop projects that unite men and women in addressing societal challenges and nurturing cooperation. And the seventh is policy advocacy, collaborate to integrate gender sensitive policies into peace building frameworks. And then eight, and the last one is media influence, use mainstream and social media to, I believe there was supposed to be a continuation, possibly to portray the he for she's and how they're supporting women's efforts in peace building and in other sectors. I'd like to give a thank you to all my panelists for contributing, and also an extra thank you to Mr. Clement Kulia. Despite the network challenges, you tried other means to get your thought across to us. You're deeply appreciated. Thank you for your time. But I just want you to stick around as we go into the Q&A session. Anoya Sedi, are you with me? I would like to hand over to you to moderate the Q&A session.
Okay, very quickly, we're going to have, I'm sorry that my camera is off. I'm having some network trouble, so I don't want to try to limit the bandwidth. Okay, so while we have participants, type out their questions in the chat box or contributions or anything that they may want to say to add to this conversation, please feel free to do that while I have there's a comment here that someone made from Bridget. She says, Nigeria has a national action plan on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Some of the states in the Northwest also have state action plans which should be interrogated for implementation. There are women, peace and security networks in some of the states. Now, I know that, Deborah, I know that you are not here fully as a speaker, but I also know that you have done work in Kaduna State, in peace building and all of that. As a young woman now, because while we try to amplify the voices of women in peace buildings, also young women are also pertinent to this cause, because at the end of the day, a lot of the work that women are doing now is for some of us to come in and step into the shoes and to feel, and the opportunities that they have created is for some of us to create those opportunities. So as a young woman working in this space, how are you, leveraging existing networks in these states and in these communities that you work in to amplify your message, to amplify your interventions, and how has that worked out for you as a young woman in this space? I want to hear your perspective on this before I move on to the general conversation.
Thank you so much, Noya, for that question. I think personally it has proven to be quite challenging, but I think that at the same time, as challenging as it has been, I've been able to leverage on existing networks and relationships that I've over time built, and sometimes, sadly, this is the truth. Sometimes I have to push those my alliances or my allies, the he for she's at at the front before I get some sort of entry or entrance. And then when they've opened the door, for lack of better words, then I now come to the forefront, because that is the only way some communities are receptive to a young woman like me. So it has proven to be very challenging. But one thing I keep telling myself, there's a reason why I'm doing the work that I do. There's something that there's a drive. So at the end of the day, as long as the work gets done, and no matter how difficult and hard it is, as long as I can, build, rely on existing relationships and networks that I've built to continue to, push me and sort of give me the visibility that I need, or the assets that I need, then we can. Well, I will always keep pushing. But honestly speaking, it has been very challenging. I remember one of the interventions or one of the dialogue I did recently in May, and I got there. A lot of people did not know who was behind the whole work, because for whatever reasons, once they know, there's some sort of resistance, especially from some community leaders and some leaders, stakeholders. There's just this small lady, what does she think she's doing here? But once you just put them, some of these allies ahead and then in the front, but you are still the brain behind the work, and then once there's some sort of acceptance, and then they begin to ask, okay, so who is behind this? And I'm now being introduced. Then there's just this admiration and this support, because we've been able to water the ground and enough to get that acceptance. So sometimes it's about strategy. Yes, we want women's voice to be amplifying, but especially at the beginning of it, something has to give before you now get the recognition that you deserve. And I can say that I've been lucky to have amazing people to work with, that they don't want to sort of put me in the shadows, despite being the engineer around some of those initiatives, along with other young voices, both men and women, because I work with younger women and younger men in my initiative, and this has opened up other doors, and has given me a lot of for every rejection I get, or for every snare I get at least 5 more people that are willing to work with me, people that are willing to open their doors, people that are willing to listen, people that are willing to contribute. So I don't know if I simply answered your question, but I think that's my 2 pennies on the matter.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you. While we wait for any other perspectives or speaker or comments from the participants, what you said is very important, in that you spoke about how men, you always have to have men, in quotes, open the door before you can then step in. And that's basically the earlier conversation that we were having, where you asked about how can we collaborate with men, what's the role that men play. So these are some of the things that men can do, rather than see it as an issue that's for women and should be led by women and should be only include women. It's something that should be gender the gender conversation is something that should be mainstreamed in the broader conversation. The situation of women in these processes is something that should be mainstreamed in the broader conversation, not just in the broader conversation of women inclusion, of women's rights, but of human rights as well, and of general conflict resolution and peace building processes. So the role that men have to play is a bigger one than they think. So I know that Mr. Cornelius talked about how men are doing a lot and how they advocate and how they campaign, but it's also practical steps, holding a hand sometimes and opening the door for them, putting in the first words for women to put in the final words. So those are some of the things that men can do. A lot of times, like you said, we go into communities where we set up committees, we set up meetings, and if there is still how you want to start implementing it is you say, okay, let's have a percentage of women first. Not that it's a higher percentage of women or it's fully women dominated. No, we start with a lower percentage of women, because we generally believe that there'll be more acceptability if there are still male authorities and if there's a male presence in that gathering. And then those are it's still the men sometimes that help amplify the voices of these women. So a lot of times the role is not a small one. It's something that is continuous, and it's something that needs to happen for women to be able to sometimes open those doors, for themselves. Mr. Clement dropped another comment here. He said, one example of impact of women in the Northwest, Priscilla Ankuch, yes, I have heard of her. I know she did work with the Kaduna State Peace Commission. She's a strong advocate for gender and social inclusion, conflict transformation, and peace building. Her country experience spans South Africa, Gambia, Rwanda, Malawi, and Nigeria. She was a competent and results-oriented pioneer, executive vice chairman of the Kaduna State Peace Commission. Yes, she was given an appointment in another peace building position at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where she currently is. So these are the kind of things that we want to see. When these conversations are being had, let us mention these women, because I don't remember you. I think it was Mr. Cornelius, or was it you, who talked about documentation? So these women, other than talking about how we can bring more women in, the women who have already done the work, who are in this space, who are doing the work, let us mention their names. When we have these conversations, let us bring their names in. Because if that is how we amplify the voices. That's how we amplify the work that they do. When we start to, mention their names and bring them into the conversation and say, this is this person, she works in this community, this is what she's doing, no matter how small, we can now then, those formal structures that you talked about and that synergy that you talked about, that is how they can gain the visibility for that partnership to come in, for that leveraging to come in, for that funding, that support, to come in. Because a lot of times when these formal peace building structures are put in place, for them to be effective, they have to leverage the existing structures there. They have to know what is already existing, what each community is already utilizing, what means they're already utilizing, and sort of modify or leverage that to make it a broader or a more structured effort. So they don't just come in and introduce something new, introduce something different. Like we did at Global Rights, when we wanted to implement the community dialogue committees, set them up in the communities in Kaduna and Sokoto, we didn't just come and say, oh, okay, let us set up these committees. We found out what was existing on ground, and there was something already, close to that, which we sort of used and leveraged to then structure it better and say, okay, we have this, let's now try to get more women into these committees and into the conversation. So when we start to amplify the voices of these women, amplify the work that they do, mention women like Mr. Clement did now, it's good. It's a good way. It's good representation. It's a good way to get their names out there, to get their work out there, and to expose them to the support and the partnerships and the relevant collaborations that they need to make their work more impactful. So I think those are some of the contributions that we've had. I don't think there are any more questions. I think we're even out of time. Unfortunately, Abby and Edosa had to run because they have another engagement. But thank you very much to all our speakers. Okay, sorry, just 1 second. There is a question here. It says, Northwest Nigeria peace is challenged by insecurity. Can united action, campaign, and advocacy by women from the region help in the return of peace and security in the Northwest? So somebody's asking how, if women coming together to campaign and advocate in the Northwest can, sort of alleviate the, issue of insecurity in the Northwest. So Debbie, if you want to answer that, if you want to hand over the question to another speaker, let's quickly take the response to that and then get final thoughts from our panelists and then close.
I think that one of the things that we've spoken about in the course of this webinar is the importance of collaboration and how, collaborated efforts often give us best results. And we've also spoken, so of course, yes to united action, yes to, collaborations that will bring the kind of results and end to insecurity that we see in the North, the increase in insecurity that we see in the Northwest region. Earlier, the executive director, Mrs. Abiodun, was talking about how we've witnessed, decreasing levels of insecurity in the Northwest, measurable ones, and how we can we can replicate that. So if there is a united action that works and that's in the interest of the Northwest region, taking into cognizance the multidimensionality of the insecurity issues in the Northwest region, because you must understand that insecurity, especially in the Northwest region, is multidimensional. There are different kinds of insecurity that the Northwestern region is grappling with. So I would say yes, that's something that I know that, like for instance, now talking about a collaboration, and this webinar by Global Rights is in partnership with the Kuka Center, and that's another organization that works in peace building efforts across the country. So definitely, but I don't know if any of my panelists has a contribution that he can say briefly and a response to that question. And I don't know if I answered the question and sufficiently. So, and if there is any other contribution by either Mr. Cornelius, Mr. Clement, or Hajia Hawa, you can just unmute your mic and speak.
Yes, I would like to say, I would like to give a comment in response to that question. It's not a direct answer anyway, because as a principal, I try to, as much as possible, give room for other ideas when I answer a question or when I'm responding to a situation, because I believe there are more than one ways to solve a problem. The problem of insecurity in the Northwest, in my opinion, is basically due to two things. Excuse me. Poverty and ignorance. That is why women's economic empowerment and awareness is at the key of what I do, what I did in my career as a journalist in the past 20 years and what I am currently doing. Because I am of the opinion that if people understand a lot of realities and the oneness of our humanity, a lot of the insecurities that more than half of it is centered around religious and tribal differences will not be there. And secondly, more than often, you will discover that poverty is the key to everything. A poor man is a hungry man is an angry man. So a little situation that does not warrant anything, but because the man has been hungry for days or for weeks, it will escalate into something different. So yes, collaboration is key. But from my own experience in the work I have done in the field, there is not much impact that we can make by collaborating or working together so long as we are working with an impoverished community or populace. They will not be able to comprehend what we're doing. I think that realization was what made me to stand back, to reassess my work and decide that I am going to focus on women's economic empowerment for a time before I go back to other things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Hajia. I don't know if any of our panelists has a submission in that regard, but if there isn't any other, I would like to once again thank you for joining the conversation. Thank you so much for the panelists. We appreciate you. I appreciate you and your contributions, and Global Right appreciates you. I would still want to yield the mic to Noya to round up the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, once again, thank you very much, first of all, Deborah, for a wonderful guidance of this conversation. Thank you for steering the conversation in the right direction and also giving us your perspective and your experiences as well. Thank you, Hajia Hawa. Thank you, Mr. Clements. Despite the network troubles, thank you for still making your perspective heard and known. Thank you, Mr. Cornelius. Unfortunately, Mrs. Ramatu couldn't join us. I think she had a bit of a network issue, but she couldn't be here. But thank you very much for everybody who could be here, all our participants, everybody who contributed to this webinar. Thank you so much. And like we said at the beginning, and we've been saying, this is not something that we are doing just to tick a box. This is a conversation that will be taken, I will be taking up, this is a conversation to action. It's more than just a webinar, it's a call to action. So while we've all had these conversations and we've all had these deliberations, it's good that in the work that we do in our own fields, let's take something from this and implement it. The small steps like this, that help us achieve the ultimate goal. Once again, thank you to everyone who joined, and we hope that we can continue to count on your support and collaboration going forward. So let everybody have a nice day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.